Hello and welcome back to our Desert Island Disc series. Today my guest is Pip Williams, the man, the myth, the legend, and my dad.
That's the most important bit. I'm the dad.
It's the best job you've had your entire life, I swear.
I'm pretty good at being a granddad.
Oh yes. Well, there's two little boys that would, I'm sure, agree with you on that one. So today you are on a desert island and you are allowed to have 3 recordings or songs with you, 1 book and 1 luxury item. Now you have listened to Desert Island Discs far more than I have. So you probably know the rules far better than I do.
Yeah, I've listened to it all my life. In fact, I think it started in the 50s, and I've always enjoyed it, and still listen to it on a Sunday.
So you've been there through all of the different presenters, the different generations.
I can't remember the first one, but just Sue Lawley and people like that did it, and other guy I can't remember them all, but it's the same format, and it works really well. I quite enjoy it.
It's a good way to talk to people about how music has shaped their lives, really.
Yeah, I mean, it's been really, really difficult to choose 3 songs because, I mean, over my life, I've heard so many, God knows how many songs I've heard. So what I've done, I've chose songs based on the quality of the song and what they do for my memory.
Yeah.
To remind me of things in my past. So
yeah, well, I think that's something that we've learned across the whole Desert Island Disc series is that we often associate music with memory.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what's your first song?
Well, my first song is Whiter Shade of Pale by Procol Harum.
Yep.
And it reminds me of when you're living your life, you don't understand sometimes how good it is. So my teenage years were brilliant because I was playing in bands and having a lot of fun, being a really good teenage life. But one of the little jobs I had was that in those days, bands used to play, or groups as we called them in those days, used to play at local town halls because they didn't do the big concerts. They didn't play to 20,000 people. They played to 250 people or so. Indeed, the Beatles played at Abergavenny Town Hall. And so you got top names playing locally at your town hall. And so in Bridgewater, we had, it was called the Top 20 Club. And my friend Terry, his dad, used to be the organizer. And so he employed Terry, Harry and me, who were just in our teens, to do the backstage stuff, go out and get the bits and pieces and all that sort of stuff.
Have you just been joined by the dog?
Yeah. And anyway, so we got to meet all these people. Sadly, the rule was we had to be professional and not ask for autographs, which is a real shame because I would have had the best autograph collection ever. I've now got a dog nudging me like there's no tomorrow. But anyway, this one week, so every Monday night was a Top 20 Club, and in those days, the town hall was like a ballroom, so people just gathered. There wasn't any seating or anything. So they would gather and stand up and watch and dance to the groups. And we had a group in called, they had a very, very jazz-like name. So it sounded like a jazz group, but in fact they were a rock group. And anyway, they were called the Paramounts. And that was a name very much associated with, banjo, saxophone, flute, whatever. Playing sort of jazz stuff. So hardly anybody turned up, and so we were at the front watching them after we'd gone and got their stuff and all that stuff that we had to do for them, and they were brilliant. And then at the end of the gig, the keyboard player, his name was Gary, sat down at this really battered old piano in the dressing room, and he said, "Oh, I'm working on a song. Would you like to hear it?" And that used to happen a lot. We very often got that. And so we said yes, and he just started with just sitting at a battered old piano going, "You skip the light fandango, God will skip the floor." And we kind of went, "Oh yeah, that's really good," because you always say that. And I could see that being a huge hit, you know. And anyway, about a year and a half later, Harry and I were in a coffee bar in Burnham-on-Sea, which was a big centre of my life back in those days. In fact, still one of my favourite places now. And suddenly on came this song, and Harry went, "That's the song that guy played," but of course it was now really dramatic, the big Hammond organ intro and all the rest of it. And so we went, "Wow, it can't be, no." And we went over to the jukebox, and it said Procol Harum, which is a much cooler name than the Paramounts, isn't it? And then when we got back to, because we had scooters, so we drove our scooters back to Bridgewater, went into Taylor's record shop, which the guy owned, the promoter owned, and said, "Have you heard this song?" And he went, "Oh yeah, they changed their name to Procol Harum now," and that was it. So
were they the same lineup?
Pretty much. I think there was I think about 3 of them had survived from the Paramounts, and then but it was the sound was fairly similar still, but instead of using a Hammond, they just had an electric Vox keyboard. But yeah, I mean, it was very much the same guys. They were from Essex, and yeah, they were brilliant.
I think as a keyboard player, that opening Hammond number, that little riff that they do, is absolutely iconic. It's up there. Like every saxophonist wants to play Baker Street. I think there was a generation where every keyboard player wanted to play Whiter Shade of Pale.
That's right. And there was no secrecy about it. It actually was based on a classical piece of music. So what they wanted to do was to take, this came out with interviews later, that they wanted really to move pop music into a new era where it was, and they succeeded in doing it. And of course it sold loads and loads and loads of records.
Well, it's that fusion, isn't it, of what you already know and what is new and up and coming.
Yeah, that's right. It was pop music has always moved, not necessarily in a good direction, sometimes in a not so good direction. I think with the development and technology has helped, because obviously we had things like the Moog and those kind of keyboard instruments that could help create better and better sounds. I think sometimes it goes backwards, because I think nowadays with the use of loops and that sort of technology, that people are writing songs based on the loops rather than writing songs based on the old structure of intro, verse, chorus, etc. So you get stuff that can sound a bit samey, but then other stuff comes out that sounds brilliant. And but that was it. But so yeah, Whiter Shade of Pale always makes me, whenever I hear it, and I play it quite regularly. I mean, it's on an album that I have here in the house, and I very often listen to it.
I find it interesting that you say that regularly these bands would, essentially play their new stuff for their roadies in a dressing room, whereas now people just take straight to Facebook. People, so what used to be a case of, you would travel the country with your band and then, sit in a dressing room with a bunch of roadies and say, oh, this is the song we're working on. Whereas now you can record it from your bedroom with some pretty sophisticated technology and pretty much record it, produce it, and, create almost a finished product and put it out on social media. If you go back sort of 10, 15 years, it was MySpace. Everyone was putting their music out on MySpace. Whereas now we've got Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, IGTV, there's so many different ways that you can put music out there. But do you think that people get a better reaction performing in a dressing room to a bunch of people? Because you said, we always said that it sounded great. Did you ever give a really brutal opinion?
No, we weren't allowed to do that. We weren't allowed to ask for autographs, and we weren't allowed to give an honest opinion.
I suppose nowadays it would be you're not allowed to ask for a selfie.
Yeah, I suppose.
People don't ask for autographs anymore, do they?
No, I guess not, do they? I mean, what will happen in the future antique road shows and things. Somebody coming up with a bunch of selfies and go,
Yeah.
"Oh, this is all the selfies my great grandmother took."
Yeah. A load of memory cards that just have
Yeah, that's
photos
right.
on them.
Yeah, yeah. It's amazing, isn't it, how much might get lost. I mean, it's nowadays I have so many pictures on telephones, and on and various other sort of digital stuff. Whereas in the corner, we've got a bag of photographs taken in the 70s and the 80s. They're never going to come back. I've just had a message flock up into my screen from Jonathan Case.
Well, I think, yeah, I think one of the things that I remember very much from my childhood is that Nan and Grandad, your parents, had Polaroid cameras.
Yes.
So it wasn't even like, you had an old Fuji or anything like that. When we were with our grandparents, it was an instant moment, and if that photo was ruined, never mind, that was all you got. And if that photo got lost or damaged, there were no negatives that you could then go back and recreate that photograph from.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I used to love that, didn't he? Taking the pictures.
Polaroids are making a big resurgence, aren't they? They've got new
apparently
digital versions of, I think they're called Instax. This is going to make me sound like right old grandma at the age of 37, isn't
it? Yeah.
So what would your second song be?
My second song is Nights in White Satin.
By the Moody Blues.
Yeah. Well, you talking about my granddad, your granddad rather, my dad. And I had this car. There used to be a make of a British car called Standard. And I had a Standard 10. And your granddad had modified it so the back seat folded down so that I could put my amplifier and my guitar and whatever in it. If you remember, he was a bit car mad. And so I had to wash this car every Sunday morning. And in those days, we're going back, I'm going to sound like a sort of old technology fan here. And we used to have transistor radios known as trannies, which were battery operated. And they weren't that big, they were only sort of yay size. And then you turn it up to volume 11 and put it beside the car. And if you remember Ashdown Cottage, so I would be parked beside Ashdown Cottage washing my car. And the Moody Blues changed singer, and Justin Hayward had taken over as a vocalist. And this was the first record that I heard really with Justin Hayward singing the lead. And I was washing the car, and I was really, Grandad was in the background, and he was kind of talking at me.
As was his way.
As was his way. And anyway, this record came on, and I went, whoa! And it just hit me for six. I thought, what a brilliant record. And again, it's a record that I very often listen to late in the evenings. And it came on. It was just a really wonderful record. And then a few years later, when I met your mum, she was a big fan of the Moody Blues. And in fact, just a few years ago, we went to see them down in St David's Hall and in Cardiff. And they did the first set, and it wasn't that good. To the point where I was seriously thinking of, do you know what? I might just go home. The sound wasn't quite right. And they were playing really obscure tracks from albums that weren't really well known.
Oh, and the kind of filler tracks.
Yeah. And then in the second set, it was a whole different story. The sound was perfect. They played all the known numbers. And then, of course, they left this one till the end. And then they played Nights in White Satin. And to be quite honest, well, your mum actually said, I can't remember how much it cost. I think it was about 40 quid or 50 quid for a ticket. And then as we were walking out of St David's Hall, your mum said, do you know what? That ticket was worth the price just to hear that one song.
Just for that one song.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that Nights in White Satin, for me, was the first kind of mainstream piece of music where I heard a flute being featured. So, as someone who was a flute player, and you know, realistically, I knew that my career was never, and bear in mind I'm sort of 10 years old at this time. I knew that my career was never going to be in classical music. As much as I love it, I just knew my career was never going to go down that path. So I was following very much that jazz career path, which sounds really pretentious, doesn't it, to have a 10-year-old following a career path? But with you as my dad, I don't think I ever would have gone a different way. But I think that this, like the Moody Blues, were the first people who featured my instrument in the mainstream music. You know, it's like the old recorders and Stairway to Heaven. You know, there are just so few sort of pop genres that include my instrument, as at the time I was sort of primarily a flautist, that wasn't just as a part of a big orchestral section, that it was actually a featured instrument. And I think I found that really kind of inspirational.
Yeah, I mean, another band that used to use the flute a lot, of course, was Jethro Tull.
But he was slightly more on the obscure side, I think.
Yeah, he used it. Apparently, he discovered quite later in his life that he was actually playing it incorrectly. Now, I don't know enough about the flute because I'm not a wind instrument person. So, but he apparently discovered that he was actually, his fingering was all wrong or something. And of course, he used to stand, you know, on one leg, and it was a big act. Whereas I think with the Moody Blues, it was a really great performance. And the other thing I liked about the Moody Blues were that in their albums, their drummer used to tell these little stories and little poems between the tracks. And I can't remember which album it was, but there was one bit where it just opened with, "There you go, man, keep as cool as you can." And then it went off into this, face, piles and piles of trials with smiles or something. I can't remember the exact. And when we saw them, the drummer, who of course now they were quite old, you know, we saw them a couple of years, and the drummer, had to have another drummer. So all he did was just hold the snare and the hi-hat, and this other drummer did all the clever bits. And he had a walking stick, and he came down off the drum stand, and he would sort of do a little intro for the song, and he had that lovely Birmingham accent, but it wasn't a really broad accent. It was just a Birmingham touch.
That twang.
And it sounded really good. So it was a great concert. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the second half. I thought the second half, I was like, gone, you know, wow, this is it. And so, yeah, it was good. And it's a lovely song. And again, I've heard it over and over the years, and it's always been there everywhere you go. And in fact, very often, if I'm sort of, it's a song I play a lot with my students.
Yeah.
You know, so we sing it, and because it's lovely chords. It's 12/8, so it's an interesting.
It's got that triplet kind of count to it, hasn't it?
Yeah, and and it's really good. And I don't do karaoke very often, but if ever I do, I usually do that song.
Yeah,
because it's a great song.
I find that when I'm teaching GCSE music, Nights in White Satin and Hide Your Love Away are the two that I always use as 12/8 kind of examples. And nowadays, you know, I can also use things like the Game of Thrones theme, because that's in a compound signature and things like that. But there was a point where everybody wrote in 4/4, so it's nice to have something that's got that 1 under, 2 under, 3 under.
That's right. Well, by the time when the 80s came around, everybody were using Simply Stripes on the tape to keep the beat, and drum machines had just come in. So basically, everybody was stuck with 4/4 because the machines. If you said I want to do a 12/8, the sound engineer would look at you and go, "We can't do that."
Yeah.
And so it was because as the years have gone by, I mean, multi-tracking has come down to it's good, but it's also bad. There's a particular. Am I allowed to mention somebody negatively?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. Well, a band that both your mum and I have seen many times, and I've seen before I met you on, is Alan Price. I
Oh, from
love
the
his.
Animals.
Yeah, but after post Animals, I'm talking
Yeah.
about. And anyway, I've seen him. He played a couple of gigs up at Ebervale College,
Mm-hmm.
and he played also down at Nash College. And he had a lineup, great lineup. Bobby Tench on guitar and all sorts of people like that. George, what's George's stage name? Zoot Money, playing on keyboard as well. So a great lineup of people. And they performed their songs. They were brilliant. And I bought an album, a couple of albums off of them, and they're horrible because they sound so cold. And I think it's because of the multi-tracking.
Yeah, it's the overproduction, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like I've been with you at a couple of the Alan Price gigs, and it's an atmosphere. It's, you know, there isn't a sense of overproduction.
No.
Whereas I think that, as you know, those of us who are more kind of technically minded, you know, both you and I are sound engineers as well as musicians, and you know, you've done A&R for years, that you do have that spark, that magic spark that you see when you see a band perform live, that when you then get them into the studio, if you start to then overproduce and to over compress and to, you know, bring in string sections and bring in brass sections and, you know, do everything, you lose, it almost becomes clinical.
Yeah, I think that's a mistake. And I think that then comes back to what I was saying earlier in our conversation about as the technology's gone on, people are starting to see the technology as more important than the performance. And I was at a gig with a sound engineer that you know, doing a gig for an artist called Kitty, somebody or the other. And she left a microphone on while she was, which she shouldn't have done, and it caused a feedback. So as the loop was going on, it just kept coming back because, you know, and Mark was trying to desperately get rid of this sound. He couldn't do anything about it. So she would sing for 30 seconds and then another instrument would come and be added to it. And then again, the song had no, by the time she got through about 3 minutes, you sort of, well, actually, this is a very short melody. It's only about 30 seconds long, and it is really boring me now.
Yeah.
And this thing has got trapped in the loop. And so she had a nice voice, and she played the guitar well, and but the technology got in the way of that gig. So
I always find people who multi-track live as part of their kind of performance, I love the artistry. I love seeing how cleverly the technology works in that environment. And I think as a sound engineer and as a musician, I can compartmentalize that and say, I really appreciate how much skill has gone into creating this. But I think, like, if I was to bring my husband in, who is, you know, an amateur guitarist, you know, he's a recreational player, he'd have no idea, you know, and he'd probably sit there thinking, well, now I've listened to the same 8 bars over and over until we finally end up with 12 instruments on it, but has it actually progressed, you know? So I think that there are sort of pros and cons to the live multi-tracking thing for me.
No, I feel that it like I've said, it can detract really. And as you say, you listen to the same 12 bars, and it's a 12 bars with something added to it, 12 bars with something added to it. And I like that layering up, but I also like laying down.
Yeah.
So that you add some instruments, you know, maybe you start a song with just a guitar and a vocalist, and then you build it up, build it up, and then maybe the last verse goes back to a guitar and a vocalist.
Yeah, the old term we used to use was the attack and decay, wasn't it?
Yes,
you have to have the
Yeah.
decay, and if you don't, I mean, decay is an awful word to use, but it's the technical term for it. And if you don't, you end up feeling like it just drops off the face of a cliff. That it just builds up and then suddenly stops. And there are some environments where that absolutely works, but there are some environments where it just doesn't. And if you don't have that equal amount of decay as well as attack, you know, you don't get the right release.
Yep, I agree with that totally.
So what would your third song be?
Oh, my third one. Okay. I think this is the perfect pop song, and it's Jerry Rafferty, Baker Street.
I've already mentioned it, haven't I? Sorry, I gave the game away. I apologize. Yeah.
So, yeah, no, it is, in my opinion, the perfect song. I first heard it. I was working in West London, in Southall, and back in those days, people used to go for a lunchtime pint. You wouldn't dream of it. Wouldn't even dream of it nowadays. But in those days, you went to work, and at about 1 o'clock, you go off to the pub and have a pint of pie or whatever, a meal of some sort. And anyway, we were in this pub in Southall, and I was with a guy with a very famous brother, actually. His brother's Jeremy Paxman.
Oh, James, yes.
James, yep. And so anyway, James and I was sitting there, and suddenly on the jukebox came this song, and everything about it was perfect. It's a lovely story, right? So the lyrics are really good. It tells a story about a couple of drunks who are going to get over it, and they're going to build a life, but it's told in a really nice way. It's not told in a horrible way.
Yeah.
And the use and the saxophone use in it is absolutely stunning. And the interaction between the lead guitar and the sax is just so brilliantly done. The structure of the song is absolutely amazing. There's a kind of the percussion in it is what Jonathan would probably go, oh, that is the most brilliant percussion ever. Because you've got the regular kit, but you've also got this kind of bongo type song going on. But it's very subtle. You know, I was listening to it just the other night, I think the night before last, and you're hardly aware of it, but you are aware of it. The bass in it is amazing as well. Everything about it is perfect. So from the day I first heard it, and then I played it a few times after that, came across it a few times. Jerry Rafferty's voice is brilliant. He had quite everybody thinks he just was an overnight star, but he didn't. He played with bands like Steelers Wheel and a couple of other bands. And in fact, I believe he was in a band with a Scottish comedian, Big Yin.
I can't help you on that one. I don't think I know.
No, I can't remember his name. But anyway, so because he was a Scottish guy, and he had a long background of coming out of the folk scene, coming into this, coming into that, and it was like I say, every time you hear it, you go, "Well, you couldn't better that." I mean,
absolutely not.
Like the person who's written songs, and recorded songs. I have to say that I've always kind of aspired to get to that kind of level.
Yeah.
So
I think it was the first proper feature of a riff featuring an alto sax. Yeah.
And I also think, in fact, I've talked to your mum about this a few things in the past, that sometimes you sit in a studio at the control desk, and you're doing the final mix, and then suddenly you and the engineer or the producer or whoever you're with, and you look at each other and go, "Whoa, what's that?"
Yeah, that's it.
You're not aware of it while you're recording it. So they could bring the sax player in, because that song would have been multi-tracked.
Yeah.
And they probably brought up and then somebody, and they just go, "Oh, did you try that bit? Oh, did you try that bit?" And then do, "That sounds right. Yeah, great." And at the end of it, they go, "Whoa, what?" And it's the perfect thing.
I think it's a really good example of a song where the final product is better than the sum of its parts.
Yeah.
Very often, you listen to certain songs and you take Sweet Child of Mine, that guitar riff opening is iconic. You take Smoke on the Water. How many people actually know the chorus of Smoke on the Water?
Yeah, right.
They know the riff.
Yeah.
So you can't have you do have certain songs where the sum of its parts sometimes is greater than the finished product, because people remember one way or another, something that features far more prominently. Whereas I think Baker Street, people don't just focus on that opening sax riff.
They don't.
They do actually know the song.
Yeah. And I think, I don't know how many people actually listen, because I love to listen to the lyrics.
Yes.
That's why I like songs that have got the lyrics predominantly up there.
Yeah,
and my philosophy when I was working in a studio was you record a song and then a piece of music, and then you throw it away for 5 days so that you've forgotten the lyrics. And then when you come back, and I always used to like to mix to the lyric rather than mix the backing track and sit the lyric on top. I used to like to get the lyrics, get the whatever effect I was going to have on the lyric, which was very little if possible, and then build the instrumentation up to it.
Yeah.
And I think that's and I think that's what happened with Baker Street, was they got it absolutely right.
Yeah. And it's one of few examples of it, really. I mean, one of my big examples of that is the Stereophonics Word Gets Around album. That they didn't write conventional love songs at all for that entire album. They wrote observational lyrics. So they wrote Local Boy in a Photograph, which is just talking about who this person in a photo is, how he related to other people. It very much tells a story.
Well, again, that's what I like about Baker Street, is it's from two people who obviously are a couple of drunks, but are planning to move to the country and make life better. And it's the only problem with the song is that one of my favourite eateries is in Baker Street in Abergavenny.
Yeah.
And whenever anybody mentions Baker Street, the sax goes off in my head.
And then you can't stop hearing it.
Oh, can you recommend a pub, for a good lunch? I go, and I mention the pub, and then they go, where's that then? I go, oh, Baker Street, and they go, ba 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 da da.
Yeah.
So
I think something that sound engineers suffer from, and I think we've probably talked about this quite a lot throughout our lives, is that we start to hear things that aren't there when we know a song really, really well. So it takes an exceptional engineer and producer to be able to get that final mix, because we do know the song so well when we are recording it that you start,
that's why I say
you hear the lyrics. You hear the lyrics far more prominently because you know what's coming. You can sing along with them. You can sing the saxophone part.
Yeah, I think many years ago we went to see the original Phantom of the Opera in London, and I think that was a big problem with that production, was the engineer knew all the lyrics and the voices just weren't prominent enough.
They're too low in the mix.
And we went to see it again in Cardiff with a completely new team producing it and putting it on, and the lyrics were just perfect. But and it's something that your mum and I have talked about this a lot. You go to a gig and go, oh no, the sound engineer knows the lyrics. And it's very difficult.
Yeah, you hear stuff that's not there as well. So if you've heard the band play with drummers that have got additional parts on their kit, you start swearing blind that you're hearing a tambourine when there isn't one.
Yeah, and sometimes when you're recording you can hear things that aren't actually, you hear a fault. And do you remember Paul that I used to work with? Right? And anyway, he got asked to do something with I guess it was the Welsh Orchestra, but anyway, and I was with him, and so they were doing the Bolero. It wasn't in his studio at Bridgend, it was done at another studio in Cardiff, and they were doing the Bolero, which is like so difficult. And he thought that he heard a pop on a mic, and he just stopped the tape. And it was like slow motion. There was two other people in the studio with in the sound room with him, and I was going, slow motion. Don't do it. But he did it, And we literally, I think, had to lock the door because they remembered the orchestra that were wanted to kill him. And of course, they had to start all over again because, of course, you couldn't multi-track the bolero.
No.
You just had to go straight through.
Yeah. Were you doing reel-to-reel recording? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you remember that?
Well,
yeah,
my year when I did sound engineering, my year was the last year of analog recording. So as I was in my second year, the first years were all learning digital. All of them were learning digital. Now I did learn some digital, but there is something so satisfying about unwrapping a reel and spooling it up. And
quite interesting. Do you remember you and I did a concert? We were involved with it up at Ebervale College just before they launched their BTEC.
Yes.
And there was one of the judges there owned a studio in Cardiff, big tall guy, and I can't remember his name. But anyway, he was chatting to me, and he said what saddened him was there's a whole bunch of skills that have been lost forever.
Yes, I talk about this all the time. So my example is compression. So when I was learning sound engineering, we had to talk about, you know, those graphs, hard knee and soft knee compression, and we had to learn about the frequencies. So which frequencies were the high frequencies you wanted to cut out, which were the low frequencies you wanted to cut out. And you essentially had to know how to adjust every single one of the parameters to give you your hard knee or your soft knee compression. Now, I have a digital multi-tracker that just has a graph on the screen, and I have a little knob that I twirl around and it creates it for me.
And the other thing is that tape slicing was a real skill, and there was lots of other skills that you had to do, because obviously you do a mix or you add like backing up the tape and everything, so that if you make a mistake, you know, if you think, oh, we'll add that one track. And then we used to do a thing called track bouncing. And so you do
nowadays known as copy and paste.
Well, that's right. But so there was all sorts of skills that you had to learn.
Patching. Patching, punch-ins. Still to this day, I hate a punch-in. But punch-ins are so much easier to do on digital because you can pull it down to a, you know, you can expand your window down to sort of fractions of seconds.
What I used to find happened was during the final mix, because a mix would take a long time because you build up and build up and build up and build up. So you're doing all your stuff, and then you get to that final one. You say, okay, this is the one now, because most of the faders are going to be in the same place. It's just 2 or 3 faders that you're going to be messing about with, like the lead guitar, that obviously the lead vocal, and things like that. And I used to find, say you were working on a 3.5-minute track or a 3-minute track or whatever, that you find that 3 minutes lasts an hour, and it's like slow motion. And you're just there, and it's sort of like, and the concentration is just unbelievable. But the one skill I had was the fade. I was one of the best faders ever, because I didn't need, I know somebody I still regularly bump into in his studio in Gavilan, he was used to use a pencil, and still would like be very nervous for the fade. But I could do it with both just 2 fingers. I used to use that finger and that finger, and then slide it down and get it like I used to enjoy doing that. And the other thing was sometimes you wanted to fade with because when I first started working, everything was in mono. And in fact, John Lennon really was very against stereo. He said, well, that's not pop music. You know, pop music should be loud and in your face, coming at you. Right. And we go back to what I was talking about earlier, you know, the tranny by the side of the car, you know, or out in the garden where you're having a cup of tea or whatever, was obviously just one speaker. And if you listen to all that, you know, 50s, 60s, 70s pop music, it was all really aimed at being in mono. And then when stereo came along, the sound quality changes between the stereo and the mono. So you on the mixer that we had, you could then tap in and say, like, can I listen to it in mono now? And very often so you've got a particular instrument and it's perfect in stereo. You tap in a mono and suddenly it goes through the roof. Wait, where did that go? And so there was a lot of other skills that had to be learnt for that, because, for example, Sergeant Pepper, which if we were doing a top 10 albums, that would be my number one. They first recorded in mono, and John Lennon, like I said, was really against it going out in stereo. He said, no, it's got to be mono because it's pop music. But nowadays everybody wants stereo. I like stereo as well.
I like the spatial awareness that you can create through pan. Always have enjoyed that, so that you can kind of get a slightly better feel for how everyone would be laid out if they were standing on stage, so that you have got somebody who's slightly hard left or whatever. But I do think that because nobody listens to anything mono anymore,
that's right.
That ability to be able to anticipate how your mix is going to differ from stereo to mono, I think sound engineering is almost a dying art, if that's controversial to say. I'm sorry, but
I agree with you. I think that what's happened is that the technology, and going back to what that producer said to me after the Ebervale gig, there's so many skills are going with the digital stuff. And I mean, one of the like, for example, now you program the fade.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can say how many seconds you want it to be, or, and I mean, I do it with video editing, that, I'm constantly programming fades and stuff like that, so there's, whilst technology is making it far more accessible for people, which I think is an amazing thing. It's studio time was elite. If you even go back to, I mean, when did I start doing mine? 1999, it was still very much studio time was elite, and that you had this huge kitted out studio with a desk that was bigger than a double bed, and it very much was a privilege to be in a studio, which is why you never wasted studio time by tuning up or songwriting in a recording studio. But also you never wasted a take, because you were wasting tape. That
well, there was a lot of myths about what happened in studios, because people used to think that all these pop musicians were in there, smoking dope and doing all sorts of illegal things, but in fact that would never have happened.
No.
I mean, it was you worked for Decca or one of the labels. You were just in there and you worked every minute that you had.
Yeah, absolutely.
They resented you going to the loo sometimes.
Because it was such a privilege to have studio time. So nowadays, you can get a yeah, absolutely. It was pricey, wasn't it? Mm-hmm. So, nowadays you can essentially multi-track on a laptop in a bedroom, which is great. It means that music is now far more accessible, but it does mean that those skills that we as engineers learned are really a dying art. That if you had somebody who needed live compression, I don't think people would know how to do it. No,
that's right. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. So we do sound like a couple of real oldies, don't we?
I know. I'm 37, but I think because I knew that my year was the last year that school, because I went to school in England for this rather than in Wales. I don't know what the Welsh situation was, but certainly for institutions in England, my year was the last year of analog, full-time analog tuition. And I think there's always been a part of me that's felt like that's something I needed to carry on, because my year was the last year that I had the privilege of learning how to mix in analog, how to record in analog, and how to spool a reel and things like that, And,
well, and even at our own studio, we used to have a 4-track that we used cassettes.
Yeah.
So there's a whole bunch of skills that you had to have there. That suddenly have disappeared, and it's In fact, somewhere around the place, I think I've got boxes full of cassettes with 4 tracks on. If anybody ever comes across them in the future, we'll be, how do we mix this together? We've got no way to do it. And I suppose it's quite an interesting thing. My grandfather was one of the last clay puddlers, right? So we're talking about skill of a different area now, a manual skill. And so he used to work on the canals and things, and he knew how to puddle clay to make it absolutely waterproof. Okay, so the canals were just built on clay, and the reservoirs were built on clay. And I remember the canal at Gavilan broke. It leaked, and they had to replace it with concrete because there was nobody that knew how to puddle clay. So they had to put concrete in because, well, what can we do? and
it's literally a profession that doesn't exist anymore.
Bringing back to music, they'll have those things in the future. Somebody like in the show we will rock you. They'll find tapes and things. Go, what do we do with these tapes? We don't know what to do with them because they'll never be able to hear the sounds because they won't be able to recreate that sound.
Yeah, and I think it's something that we need to keep teaching.
Yeah, I don't know how.
Skills. Well, even just this conversation, just by being able to put this out there and say that, analog is a wonderful world, and that, maybe as a bit of a novelty, someone might want to record an entire album using analog only techniques. Vinyls had a resurgence.
Yeah, I was just going to say that it might come about one day that somebody said, you know what, let's get a reel-to-reel and we'll do it. So we'll have a 24 or 36 track, the big 2-inch tape. Yeah. Because the 2-inch tape always sat on a face down tape, and then the 1/4 inch that was the final track was always on the side. So it always had a funny, weird feel about that. How's that going to go from there to that? But there you go.
Do you know, I still to this day can remember the smell of unwrapping a reel. Do you know what I mean? It almost it's the same kind of smell that you used to have with camera film canisters.
Oh yeah.
It just had that waft, and there was this thing, you'd open the polystyrene on it because it was always like black on the inside, wasn't it? It was almost like light sensitive stuff, and I've just still got this memory of that smell, and I wouldn't say that it's a nice smell, it's just that I think I remember it so much from my childhood as well. Of sitting in control rooms and knowing that I could not make any noise.
Well, yeah. Well, we're right back to talking about memories of when you were a youngster, you were hanging around recording studios.
Yes, absolutely. I grew up in them.
I mean, you could go into any sort of popular venue and sit there with 1,000 people of your age. Said, when I was 12, I used to go into a recording studio and.
But it was also like when I was 3 or 4. I literally have memories of sitting, looking up at the control, like sitting on. It was a Marlin amplifier. I think you maybe still have it. You know the amplifier with a fish on. Yeah,
that's it. I've still have it in my room.
I've just got these like, those flashbulb memories of sitting on a Marlin amplifier. I think there was, correct me if I'm wrong, there was a Marlin guitar that had a floating bridge.
Yep, that's right.
How do I remember a floating bridge? I was like 4. That shows I've been a guitar geek my entire life.
It was a guitar that, because when you got to a certain point where you could no longer tune it.
Yeah, the bridge is like a skateboard ramp.
Yeah, that's right, and that's why I got rid of it, because I was playing at a very special occasion, and by the time I got to this one point, I had to stop playing because it had gone out of tune. I probably was the only person in the entire church that could hear that it was out of tune.
Oh, but all it takes is one, isn't it? But I've got this like really vivid memory of sitting on that amplifier with that, I think it was a white guitar on the wall, this Marlin, in a room that had this kind of bluey grey wall, I think. And this glass panel at the back, which was the control room. And I don't remember much about it, but I've got this image, and the detail is so clear on it. And, you know, I don't even know if we've got photos from that time, you know? So, yeah.
There's a photo in my room of a band, and they've got the sound desk. They were called, we used to call them the Tasties.
Yeah, but it's like
quite a taste, of course.
But as far as that kind of like photos of the studio are concerned with me in it, I don't think we have any photos.
Oh no, I don't think we have.
Well, we weren't there to make memories, we were there to make music. You know?
Yeah.
So it's almost like, yes, the memories are there for me, but as far as the actual job was concerned, I was there to sit down, shut up, and just enjoy the environment, which I think I must have.
Yeah. You never used to mess about anyway. And I guess we're learning, weren't you? I mean, it's what you want to do.
Yeah. So what would your book be?
The Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, which is a collection of poems written a long time ago in Saudi Arabia, I guess it would be today. And there's some really nice stuff in there. I have a collection of them, but I can't remember where they are. We were doing it at a restaurant, and I was talking to your mum about this the other day, and they're probably in a box somewhere under the stairs or under somewhere or the other. But anyway, yes, and they are interpreted by a guy who then would change it each time. So he did 5 editions, and there was subtle changes in each one. But it's a poetry that I've enjoyed since I was very young, since I was about 10 or 11.
Yeah.
So,
which edition do you have? Do you know?
All 5. I have the lot.
Do you have a favourite out of the 5?
No. I would go because the differences are so subtle that by the time when you get to the bit that's changed, you don't. I mean, the most famous bit is the moving finger writes, and having writ moves on. No party nor wit shall lure it back to change one word of it. And that's the bit. And I think, I got a feeling that might have actually been on a Moody Blues album. But anyway, but it was, it kind of says it all, really, that whatever, you know, that you can't undo what has been done or what has been said. And
it's very Lady Macbeth, isn't it? What is done cannot be undone.
Yeah, so it's, but it's sort of, I don't know, wider than that, if you like. He's kind of almost a sort of history thing, almost and it was, I think, the first time I ever heard that, which I guess would have been at school or something. And I could almost see a picture of this finger kind of, you know, with lightning beyond it and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So that was it.
So what would your luxury item be?
Well, I guess it would have to be a guitar.
Yeah, go for the obvious. Acoustic, electric, Spanish?
Oh, acoustic, because it would have to be, you know, I don't need any electricity. I don't need anything else. I'd have to have an end supply of strings. Yeah. And then can I also request that somebody is allowed to visit me every 6 months to restring my guitar? Yeah, because I hate restringing the guitar.
Me too.
Now, the other thing is that it's funny how you go from guitar to guitar, because since lockdown, I haven't been able to change the strings on my Fender, which is a semi-acoustic.
It's a teleacoustic, isn't it?
Yeah, teleacoustic, that's right. And so I've been using my Yamaha Classical, but I've been using it with a plectrum, which my old guitar teacher would be like furious with me. And
plectrum on nylon strings.
And anyway, it would, but the sound, it's just so brilliant. Yeah. And what I'm doing at the moment is working on just 3 or 4 kind of folky type songs, but doing different arrangements with them and trying different stuff out, you know, for the last couple of weeks of term. And and everybody's saying, that's great sound, isn't it? You know, that's the best sound I've ever heard on a guitar. And of course, a classical guitar is so much louder than a regular acoustic guitar. So I've got a jumbo, which I don't use now. It's very, very old jumbo. and because I'm a bit worried about some of the mechanisms on the machine heads. So I want it hangs on the wall, and because I'd never get rid of it, and I don't really want to get it repaired, because if somebody changed the machine head, it wouldn't be the original.
Yeah.
So I'm very sentimental like that. And I sometimes tell some of the younger students that my guitars, because I have a lot of instruments around there, banjo, guitar, etc., ukuleles. I sometimes tell the youngsters that my room is like Toy Story. And then the Eco, which is the old one, he's been in recording studios and on stage in various places. And of course, he was my instrument when I was Pip the Clown. And so, and I say that how he sort of talks to all the other instruments, because I've been on the radio, and so that makes them laugh. But yeah, so this Yamaha is really earning its living at the moment.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that being a classical guitar, it stays in tune.
Yeah.
And so from one day to another, you come in, take it down, and I always tune it. I can't just pick up a guitar; I have to tune it.
Yeah, me
And I put the clip-on tuner on it, and it needs hardly any adjustment at all. Yeah. Whereas the other people coming in, theirs always needs a lot. So, but there we go.
When you've got like an 8.
So I think we'll narrow it down then. A Yamaha classical guitar.
Yamaha classical guitar. See, I'm an Ibanez through and through when it comes to acoustics.
Oh, right.
I love mine. I absolutely love mine. I've played your Fender quite a lot, and I've been playing. Dave's got a Fender as well that I've been playing from home. But there is just something about an Ibanez with acoustics. They just make. I don't know whether it's because I'm female and my physiology is different, but I find that Ibanez make guitars that fit me.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah. Because your Teleacoustic's got the bowl back.
Yes.
Isn't it?
Yeah. They weren't popular with the old Fender fans because of that different use of different material. But I like it. I think it's got a good acoustic sound. It's great electric sound. But they didn't make that many. So I'm privileged to have one, really.
Yeah.
Because they only did a run for a little while.
Yeah, I think my Ibanez was only one of 500.
Oh, right, okay.
So, but mine is like pink and sparkly because it's me, and everything I own is pink and sparkly. Well, thank you very, very much for joining me today. It's been a lovely conversation.
Okay, I'll see you in the office soon. Bye.